Hi, everybody. So we are just about to begin. I'm Paul Walsh, Head of Member Services at the EBAA, and I know that many of you don't have time for webinars. In Europe now, after years of stagnation, it looks like the market is finally turning a corner. So the thing is that this is actually not a webinar. This is an online meeting, which means that it's fun, open, dynamic, lots of opportunities for you to participate. And we probably are even going to have too many people on for the classical Zoom meeting format, but I have assured my colleagues that everything is going to work out just fine. So you would really be doing me a great favor if you could stay on mute when you're not speaking. However, we would really like to get you involved in the discussion. So if you would like to participate, please put up your hand and I'll try to include you. There may be a prize for the best contribution. We don't have a sponsor for that yet, but if you'd like to sponsor that, please let us know in the chat. I'm going to try and start by adding a poll. And here we go. This is a lunchtime session. So during the lockdown, did you adopt a healthier lifestyle? Was life less stressful and you had more time to prepare healthy dishes, or no, eating and drinking got you through this difficult period? And you can see here from this poll that the EBAA is concerned with the health of its members. It's more than you'll get from a lot of trade associations. Now we have 35 people signed up. Welcome to you all. So let's get right into the discussion. Today we're talking about charter brokers and aircraft brokers. We're going to start with charter brokers, and we have Mike Ryan, chair of the EBAA's Charter Brokers Committee. We'll also have Toby Edwards from Fly Victor joining shortly. And Mike, every day I get calls from traditional brokers who want to join the EBAA. And I also see that big brokers like Air Partner and Air Charter Service seem to be doing fairly well. So it seems like a very resilient industry. My question is, why has it been so difficult to disrupt this industry? Over to you, Mike.
I think basically because traditional disruption can tend to be around technology. And you know, for a total disruption to happen, technology has to be integrated, and especially integrated with all the operators. And unfortunately, nobody's ever got that technology absolutely 100% correct. You know, linking the brokers to the operators, to the schedules, to their pricing, so you can get instant pricing, you know, that's often been the holy grail. A lot of people have tried. A lot of people have actually got some way down the line, but it still hasn't totally happened. It will happen, I think, eventually. I think the reticence has not been from the brokers. I think it's with the operators who do actually withhold a lot of the information and don't want the information out there in the marketplace. So I'll be a bit controversial on that. So the opportunity is there. And finally, I think the most important thing is it's actually not so much the brokers, but it's the clientele as well. And the clientele still want that hand-holding, and they still want a personal service. So I don't think a computer will ever actually take over and disrupt the charter broker.
Great, Mike. Thanks very much. Toby, I might go to you for the same question in a way, a bit more specific. I was going through some of the Fly Victor press releases, and Fly Victor looks like a company that evolved from a technologically smart disruptor, a market, an app, into something that looks a bit more like a traditional broker. So why did Fly Victor not succeed in disrupting this market?
Firstly, thanks very much, Paul and team, for having me. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. I think Mike touched on it pretty well, that clients, high net worth individual customers, want high touch service. And so, yeah, you can invest in technology to support your growth and to build your brand and to expand geographically, but you have nothing if you don't have a high quality team servicing those customers. And I think we did our best. We obviously raised a lot of money, and most of that was, to be fair, invested in software, which at the end of the day hasn't disrupted per se the sector as probably those investors would like to have done. But we did gain and benefit from that investment. For example, our CRM today is still, I think, best in class. We use Salesforce, but the investment we put into Salesforce and the people, the software engineers that works on that to ensure that the service we can provide our clients is as good as it possibly can be with the tech available to us. And Mike also touched on it as well. You know, we obviously don't own any metal, and we can only go as far as the operators want to go. So who knows? The next decade might be very different. If we're raising similar amounts of money with our learnings from the past, I'm sure we could invest it better. But I would still put huge onus on customer service, on your broker team, operations team, in order to be successful.
Okay, so it seems like the technology is available, and maybe brokers are even ready for this, but what you're saying is that to a large extent, it's up to operators to catch up with this as well. And if there are operators online, I'd be happy to hear what you think about this too. I don't want to diminish what you've done either, because I know you're kind of leading the way to a certain extent on sustainability, but also on transparency. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that. And my question is, do you think the brokers should always disclose operator and aircraft details before somebody books a flight?
Yeah, transparency has been a cornerstone and something that hasn't changed since I joined Victor, which was just before the London Olympics in 2012. It was something that we spoke about very proudly, and that we've not moved away at all from that. So what do we mean by transparency? When a client comes to Victor and requests quotes with us, we will always disclose the name of the operator, the tail number of the aircraft, the actual floor plan, and actual photos where possible, to the end client immediately, so they can see exactly who is operating the flight. Do I think that's the right way? Of course I do. Otherwise, I don't think, well, we would have stopped doing it. Should everyone else do it? Totally up to them. We I think, gain a huge amount of trust and loyalty from our clients as a result of it. And it's unwavering commitment to transparency. So I'd absolutely encourage it. And if there were brokers who were concerned perhaps about being more transparent for some of the obvious reasons, then hopefully I could have a conversation with them and support them in making that decision. Or I mean, our stats, our data evidence is that it is the right way. Like our clients, I'm sure this may be the case for other brokers who aren't transparent, but we've seen more bookings per booker, better loyalty from customers this year than ever before. So that may or not be anything to do with transparency. It's always difficult to know exactly why that loyalty is
okay, but it looks like maybe the advantages are outweighing the disadvantages. I'm going to bring Mike back in. Yeah. I'm going to bring Mike back in now, and thanks for that, Toby. One way to address this, or at least to make the relationship between operators and brokers and customers a bit more seamless, is to look at the terms and conditions. And there have been issues on this, and I think on the Charter Broker Committee, you are focused on getting more standardization between brokers and operators. Could you tell us a bit about what you try to achieve here?
I mean, basically, I'm just going to show you something here, and I hope it's not back to front and everyone can read it. This is a guidelines and recommendations for charter flight contracting. It's dated May 2020. There's been a lot of effort gone into that. So basically, about a couple of years ago, we got together, pre-COVID, we got together. So I think there were 3 operators and 3 brokers, and there were 4 lawyers in the room as well. And this included VistaJet and Air Charter Services. So it was a pretty heavyweight group that was put together in Brussels, and we all traveled to Brussels with the idea of seeing how we could possibly harmonize the terms and conditions in the charter contract. So if anybody wants to go and look at them, they're actually under the AMAC area within the EBAA website, and there are recommendations. And there was nearly 3 days of discussions, and some of the key stuff that was in there, and I'll just go through is things like cancellation fees. When if you actually look across the industry, cancellation fees can be 30 days, 15 days, 14 days, 7 days, 5 days, 36 hours, 48 hours, 24 hours, or 12 hours before. There's a complete plethora of every single operator having different cancellation times. And so we came up with a recommendation that actually for the industry, it would be really great if there are only 2 times of cancellation. You can cancel at 7 days and you can cancel at 24 hours. Now, we didn't go as far as to say that some people were pushing for that, you know, it has to be 50% at 7 days, or 0% at 7 days, or 25% at 7 days, and 100% at 24 hours. What we've done is we've left that open for individuals to agree to. Another one is de-icing. So in some contracts, operators have said positioning legs, if there's a de-icing for the positioning leg, that's got to be paid by the customer. We didn't, even with the operators, some operators didn't think that was fair. So how can we rid the industry of that, of those particular terms that were in there? So this is just an example, 2 examples out there of contentious issues that aren't doing the whole of our industry a lot of good. So what are we doing about, sorry, Paul, so what are we doing about it now is, now these recommendations are here, EBAA have kindly paid for a couple of lawyers, and you've got what I think, Paul, 18 operators that have put their hands up to have their own contracts verified and checked against these guidelines. Is that correct? Is that 18 operators you're looking at?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, EBAA have paid for some lawyers, and then what will happen is they'll come up with a report. We're hoping in a couple of months' time that we'll say, you know, of the 18 operator contracts, you know, 5 of them are 100% following these. This is the areas where most are. These are the anomalies, and the report will come out. And then what we can do is then we can have a look once we've got that, and then work with the operators to see if we can redefine these recommendations. And then with the final idea that if an operator adheres to them, they then will get a seal of approval by EBAA. Once that is then done, then the brokers can then back to back those terms with their clients, and then hopefully we can end up with some standardization. So sorry to have taken up a lot of time, but that's what's happening, and I think it's a great way forward for the industry.
Well, yes, you did capture a lot in a fairly short space of time. In fact, I just want to bring in Toby's point again about transparency. Would it not be easier if brokers just disclosed the terms and conditions from the operator, just disclosed the operator whose flight they were trying to sell, and before a booking took place? Yeah,
that's what we do. So we would always.
I just wanted to ask that question to Mike.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, exactly. No, that's what happens, and in fact, that's what should happen. In fact, you should have a broker's terms and conditions that references the operator's terms and conditions. So both so the operator's standard terms and conditions should be a reference document that is attached to the broker's contract, because a broker is effectively acting as an agent for the customer in this particular case. So with every single contract, the operator's standard terms and conditions should be there. What we're trying to do is to make those standard terms and conditions the same across the industry within certain areas, so that the customers have transparency in not having to think, oh God, that's 14 days cancellation terms, that's 13 days cancellation terms, so that we can get a standard across the whole industry that puts the industry in good light.
Thanks very much, Mike. I think we'll move on now to sustainability, and I'm interested in the question of offsetting. It's quite widespread, quite common now within the industry, and on the one hand, it does seem positive. The issue that I have sometimes with offsetting is that if you offset, you still pollute. So, Mike, I want to know, do you think that if with offsetting, you give customers a free pass to pollute, and thereby you sort of distract from the bigger challenge, which is to reduce emissions?
I don't think so. I think it's a start, and you've got to start somewhere. So unless you actually start somewhere and start with offsetting and get that into the psyche of the industry, you can't do it. I'll bring in Toby, because I think Victor have done one of the most trailblazing in the industry. But you've got to start somewhere. We can see there are something like 126 electric aircraft being designed worldwide. This will happen naturally. It takes a long time to design an aircraft and to get it on, to get it certified. So it is a start. You can start off with you know, offsetting, then move on to SAF. But eventually, like the cars, it will end up electric or hydrogen for long haul. And there are roadmaps out there to 2050 that the industry has to go there. But let me hand over to Toby.
Toby, are you as optimistic as Mike? Do you think that we're on the right path?
Yeah, I largely agree. I mean, I agree with what Mike's saying. I think offsetting is just one piece, and we're proud of the offsetting that we do. It's certainly not the silver bullet. We've been doing it since 2019, and we have recently turned it over to a third party, Cooper Parry, our auditor, to go through it and scrutinize it to make sure that it's accurate and transparent, which we're really pleased with. I think, you know, if we take it up a level, like at the end of the day, Victor, we emitted 22,000 tons of CO2 last year. So we are polluting the atmosphere. We have a problem, and we need to get a grip with it pretty quickly. Our offsets cost us last year about $150,000. In 2022, that's likely to be $250,000 impact on our bottom line. So these are big numbers, but it is only a part of where we need to go. I think earlier this week, or towards the end of last week, excuse me, Airbus pledged that all commercial airlines could be running 100% SAF on 2023. I mean, that's seriously exciting. That is not far away from a huge global organization. Likewise, I think it was the NATO president at the AIN event last week. Some of you may have been on that. He said that production is going to go from 2 million gallons to 3 billion gallons by 2030 and 100% SAF by 2050. So, you know, these unlike 5 years ago, I think a lot of people would say, what is SAF? Right now, everyone, I think, at least knows what it is, and the conversations are really positive and really encouraging. And the more, obviously, when we're using SAF, we're still emitting CO2, but clearly how it's produced is a lot better than kerosene. So there's that happening. I think on the offsetting, just to pause that, I would encourage collaboration and discussion around offsets, because it is a quite opaque sector, and there are better ways of doing it. There are accredited, you know, Vera, I think, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, are like the global accredited organization. So if you were going to buy offsets, probably go through them. And I'd encourage organizations to disclose their offset purchases, be transparent about it. If you're doing it, fabulous. Why wouldn't you share that information? And if you question a third party, because there are a few, about how reputable they are, let's not fight, let's share and be like, okay, we think this actually is a better provider. And maybe EBAA, again, like with the terms and conditions, could start to stamp and approve third party organizations on offsets. So the offsetting is what it is. It costs us a lot. And we're going to keep doing it for the time being. I think the other important point about the offsetting is that when we originally did it, it was as much to say to our clients, who are hugely influential people, look, this is our truth. As I go back to the number, 22,000 tons of CO2 in 2020, and our revenues were down in 2020 because of COVID, doing passenger flights in the lockdown months, right? They're going to be up in 2021 significantly on 19. And again, hopefully, if the industry continues to do as well as it is, 2022. So the CO2 emissions are going to go up, and we need to keep addressing that problem. The final piece, in addition to the SAF, and the offsetting is obviously hydrogen, which again is extremely exciting. And like the last 10 years, I've been in the sector roughly 10 years. I think at the end of the next 10 years, we're all going to be talking about it. They've got to address some key things, like how do you get it in liquid form? How do you store it at minus whatever it is, 250 degrees? How do you rebuild the fuel tanks for these jets so that they can hold the hydrogen? But if we can start flying hydrogen, then that's also really encouraging and really exciting. And I think we wouldn't be here if we hadn't been discussing all these things the last 5 years. So it's this open forum and discussion and debate, which is great, but it's definitely not a free pass, Paul. It's not a free pass to pollute. And I also think we should defend our clients and say I've heard other speakers from other businesses, leaders of organizations, speak up for their clients. Many of our clients are philanthropists. They're doing wonderful things independently of whether or not their provider is offsetting their flights, right? But we can all do our piece. It's all of our problems, and that's kind of the message that I would share with everybody. Yeah, no, cheers, Paul.
Thanks, Toby. I quickly rushed through the previous poll because I wanted to get onto this poll about carbon offsetting. But the good news is that EBA's membership is getting healthier, and 65% have taken a healthier option during lockdown. So have I, but I think all I would need is 2 nights down at the Duke in Geneva, and I'd be back to where I was before lockdown. On carbon offsetting, 60% think that it's a legitimate way to reduce a company's carbon footprint. So thanks, Mike and Toby, for that. Toby, you mentioned SAF as well. Are a lot of customers asking you to have SAF on their flights, and can you easily collaborate with operators to provide this?
Customers are not asking for SAF at the moment. I think there needs to be a big education piece on offering SAF. I mentioned offline to the team before we came on air. I actually called a few of our key airports that we fly a lot of trips from recently, and Farnborough, Biggin Hill, Bristol, they've all got SAF. They've all got SAF available. In fact, 2 of them gave me the price for SAF. I didn't even ask for it. So they're this is really encouraging and great to see. When it comes to, I guess part of the problem is your question, Paul, is our clients asking for it? And if they're not, which they aren't really, maybe a handful are, then it's unlikely that we're obviously going to be going to our suppliers, operators, saying how much would it be to do SAF. So the question probably isn't then going back to the airport saying, can you provide SAF? What's the price increase? And then we can send you a new quote, Victor, to use SAF. I'm not going to name operators, but at the moment, when you speak to the front line, some of them are like, what's SAF? Or, no, we're offsetting. So I'm not quite sure that it's an education piece, not just for clients, but actually for the industry. We all need to get on board. If there is SAF at these airports, we've all seen the press releases this year from the various hubs that they've got SAF. That's wicked. The hard part is done. Now we just need to start scaling. And I think we scale by leaders like all of us, encouraging our teams when they're speaking with the clients who we know are slightly more open to such initiatives, like, would you like to pay a bit more and have SAF? Could we inquire this for you? That's cool. And of course, there's PR opportunities for businesses that are able to do that. I was thinking last night, how we could like do an EBAA kind of hashtag whereby the broker community get together, and every time you do a flight with SAF in a month in the next year or something, we could do something like that, right? And I'm pretty sure overnight we could put SAF more on the map than it is.
You just need to find a way to get brokers to compete on it and kind of really see the visibility that they get out of it.
Yeah, it ties into the transparency. Just finally, sorry.
Can I just jump in here, because I think it's a good time to. So one of the things that I'm chair of the broker committee. So one of the things that we've agreed, and Toby's going to help out with, is it may be there's buy here, use there. So there are a number of schemes that are evolving in the world whereby you might not actually put the SAF on your particular aircraft, but it gets used somewhere else. And in fact, that actually mitigates having to move the SAF, because if they have to move it, then you're obviously, it's sometimes you can pollute as much in moving as doing it. So what we're going to do as the committee on the AMAC committee is we're going to look to see if there's a possibility with EBAA of effectively acquiring a pool or a tank of SAF somewhere, and then seeing if brokers would be interested in coming in and buying some. So it only came up last week in a conversation, and thanks to Toby, it was his idea. But that's one of the things that we're doing as a group within EBAA, and it's a new project that's coming up. So if
that's
there are
great,
any brokers and people that want to join this, please get in touch with myself and Toby, and we'd love to hear from you.
And I'd add to that, Mike, just quickly, Paul, so first of all, the same thing with the hydrogen, by the way. If you're making liquid hydrogen, you've got to do it with renewable energy, right? So it's exactly the same. You can't obviously use coal to make liquid hydrogen. So we need the renewable infrastructure in order to then make it. But full disclosure, again, like the whole beauty of transparency is like, not only would I like all of our clients to receive quotes with Air Hamburg, VistaJet, Globe Air, whoever it is, right, side by line, centerline, etc. But it should, in my opinion, today already where there is SAF, in an ideal world, it would have the SAF price, right? And as a client, you choose. It's up to you if you want to use SAF like that. And that's where the transparency then comes. You'd see the price increase. And if you want to book it and pay for it, you should.
Very good, Toby. Thanks very much for that. We're going to have to quickly move on now to the aircraft brokers. But before we do, we have one question from the audience. Benjamin Camus, if you want to quickly come in there and let us know what your question is.
Thank you very much, Paul. Hi, everybody. Just one quick question. Even if I have many thoughts also on SAF, I would be happy to maybe liaise with you, Michael, and Toby later. But one question also more on the life cycle assessment of the aircraft themselves. Is it also a question and a topic? Because I mean, flying is something, but we are still building new aircraft, electric or not, and there's obviously also a question around the environmental impact of all this construction. So is it also a question raised by some clients or some professionals in the sector?
Okay, Toby, I'm going to give you 1 minute on that, because we're going to have to move on after that.
Yeah, really good question. I don't necessarily know the answer, but that is why I like SAF so much, is because all the planes that have already built could have much more longevity. Clearly, we've used a load of natural resources and minerals from our planet to create the planes. Rather than build yet more planes, why not use the existing planes and use SAF to run them? I mean, I have the same thought about electric cars, right? It's great, but if you're having to manufacture loads of new cars all the time, then we're just using more materials for that. So that's why I'm a big fan of SAF. I think we should roll it out. For me, it seems like the hard bit's done. It's there. Let's use it, and then keep innovating in areas like hydrogen and electric.
Thank you, Toby. Thank you, Benjamin. Let's move on to sales and acquisitions. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mike, as well, and thank you for all the great work you're doing. Sales and acquisitions. So we have Janine Iannarelli, chair of the Charter Brokers, chair of the Sales and Acquisitions Committee. We also have Eric Lewin, vice chair of that committee. This is a lunchtime session, but for some people it's too early even for breakfast. Janine, getting up at 5 o'clock, is that the key to success in business aviation sales? Janine, I think you're on mute or the mic's not working. While that's being worked out, let's go over to you, Eric. Oh, you're back. Okay, go ahead, Janine.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to echo what I said before, which is basically early to bed, early to rise.
Okay, very good. It still seems like too much of a sacrifice for somebody like me. So I'd imagine that the challenge these days is to find an aircraft for sale rather than trying to find somebody who's willing to buy an aircraft. How do you see the market now? I think you have some slides, so maybe you'd like to quickly take us through them.
Let me answer the question as to how hard is it to find an aircraft, and it's extremely difficult. A quality aircraft, let's narrow it even further. So the number of available units has declined steadily since the first of the year. Exponentially, if you want to take it from a year ago to where we are today. And within select make and models of aircraft, if you're looking for something with particular configuration, particular amount of total time, maintenance status, that is slim pickings, to say the least. And I'm going to add, as much as this sounds as a plug for a broker, an end user who enters the marketplace in search of an aircraft is going to be hard pressed to find one without assistance.
Break this down then in terms of the overall figures on the market then.
Well, you're probably going to have to move to another slide in order to come up with the current available aircraft for sale globally. That's the number of transactions that we see. Yeah, that's probably the percent of the aircraft available for sale. It's more along the lines of showing a decline in the percentage. And let me just speak to in terms of values relative to the percentage of aircraft available for sale. So typically, we've always considered anything above 10% of the installed base as a buyer's market. From these figures here, you clearly see it has been a seller's market for a very long period of time. If I had to give you an analogy in terms of available aircraft within a specific make and model, let me use one that's pretty popular throughout Europe as well as the United States, the CJ3. This time last year, there were more or less 40 aircraft available for sale out of an installed base of, round numbers, because I don't know it exactly, let's say 500. Today, I think there's 8. And among those 8, you could probably pick 1 or 2 that's really a viable aircraft for the vast majority of the buyers that are out there today. And that's echoed throughout most of the make and models of aircraft offered for sale.
With the market the way it is, do you think that there's a danger that buyers will rush into purchases without doing the due diligence that's necessary?
My first reaction is no. I think they're even more cautious at this particular moment because they're still suffering a little bit from shock as to learning what's available, the pricing, how rapid a transaction moves forward from introduction of the aircraft to the market, even if it ever hits the open market, because many transactions today are being conducted through the network as opposed to through advertisements. That being said, I just concluded a transaction where literally start to finish we were 30 days, and the pre-buy was a pretty simple affair. But it was also with a very educated buyer who operates similar aircraft. They felt they knew very well what they were getting into and wanted to take advantage of securing an airplane before someone else bought it.
Very good. I don't think we have a slide for this, but maybe you could say something about some of the drivers. Are you seeing demand for more mid-size, more shorter range, longer range, or is it across the board an increase in demand?
I think today it's across the board. I think we could have spoken to specific models last year in terms of where was the appetite for size and range. But today it's across the board. And what else I see occurring, and this is sort of an evolution from January 1, and maybe it's given greater rise to it over the last quarter, is that buyers are willing to switch product line. If they can't find the perfect airplane within the model that they set out to, they can, in some cases, be persuaded to consider an alternative, a near competitor within the same price point that will do 90% of the mission that they set out to do.
Very good. That's very interesting. Janine, now that travel restrictions transatlantically are going to ease, does this mean that we might be able to see some European supply being used to fill up that US demand?
Well, I'm not sure that travel restrictions stopped it to some degree because American citizens at first were hesitant to travel globally, but flight crews were still free to move about. And the vast majority of aircraft that I've sold coming out of the EU, for example, into the United States were done sight unseen by the prospective buyer. It was generally viewed by myself or a technical representative who was retained. And in the fourth quarter of last year, we actually bought an airplane out of Asia. We did a Zoom call with the prospective buyer, with the seller, with the team on site, who walked around with a tablet and basically showed us the airplane. Then, of course, after that, the aircraft was ferried to the US. I would say that that's one thing that's probably not going to change and be emphasized even more by prospective buyers going forward, is that if you want to sell your aircraft to someone in North America, ultimately you're going to have to deliver the aircraft to predominantly the US for due diligence inspections.
Very good. Thank you, Janine. Eric, I'll bring you in on this. Is this how you see things as well?
Well, we get involved once Janine's done her job. When a transaction had otherwise been signed or a purchase agreement's been signed. And so our experience is, you know, from her perspective on the back end. What we've seen, 2020, we got started with our business in January of 2020, and that was a wonderful timing with pandemic. That being said, 2020 for us, considering that we focus on the global market more or less outside of the US with a few touch points with the US, was good for a first year given all of the chaos in the market. What was interesting was this year started out okay, and then the summer was very, very dead. And then all of a sudden in September, things have picked up. And so I think that there, as our experience is inconsistent with the JetNet data, but I find the JetNet data really positive, and I certainly think that it's I look forward to seeing the upward trend continue.
Okay, very good. I think we can move on now to, I think, which what is the heart of our discussion. We're going to talk about knowing your customer and then talk about transparency. So I'll stay with you, Eric. Let's say Janine has an aircraft listed. Somebody comes to her representing somebody else who wants to buy that aircraft. Is Janine legally obliged to find out who the ultimate buyer is?
Well, I don't know. I think it depends. I think it depends on where Janine lives and where her business is set up and where these other people are located and where the money is transiting. Let's assume Janine is a US citizen and she's based out of Houston. She would certainly not want to run afoul of US sanctions, I think. With respect to EU sanctions, I think it's a more complicated question because you don't have a pan-European sanctions regime. You've got 26 or 27 different regimes. And so each country is responsible for doing its own thing. And it's kind of a patchwork nightmare.
So to be clear on the subject, I don't want to run afoul of any sanctions globally anywhere.
So would you say that Eric's characterization is the way that you see things?
It's opaque at the moment. I mean, I appreciate Eric's position, and we have certainly privately discussed this at length, as I'm sure many of the participants here today. But the subject matter is very topical and very important to everyone who participates in any aspect of the aviation industry. And if I read the tea leaves correctly in the United States, you are obligated to some degree to know who you're doing business with. And I think pointing to the subject of transparency, which I'm most appreciative of Mike and Toby bringing up the subject in the charter world, I mean, it is the challenge in the aircraft sales world, and the demand for it is there. I mean, the string of, or I should say the days should be gone of the days of when an airplane passed through multiple parties before it reached its ultimate end user. And Eric, or any other lawyer in the forum, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the United States, at the very least, if you are the seller of an aircraft and you're going to receive funds from someone, you need to know who's at the end of that daisy chain, and not only who it is, but how their income was derived.
Janine, we see that Mike and the Charter Brokers Committee, they're working. They've produced a document on this. What can the industry as a whole do to increase transparency in sales and acquisitions of aircraft?
Well, I mean, I think it's an individual process for each broker to adopt a policy of transparency. And in absence of any sort of regulation, in absence of any sort of set rules, it becomes an individual ethical question, and as well as what's good for the client. What's good for the client is to know how their money is spent and just exactly who they're doing business with. And I mean, to a degree, it's not where we all have the ability, the resources to some degree limit the ability to find things out. But at a minimum, you should know if you're selling an airplane, what region of the world it's going to end up with, an idea as to the person and the business that they're in. If you're a buyer, you want to know the same thing. A global perspective, if I may use that phrase, and then the deeper dive comes from as you get closer to putting that transaction together. And to date, we've relied on the counsels that represent either side, the escrow agents, the financial institutions, if they're involved in a transaction. But from all the stuff that I've been reading this past year, it seems that the burden is being placed upon everyone who's a participant in the transaction. Hence why I say the greater call for transparency is absolutely necessary.
Thanks, Janine. Eric, on this, I think that one of the challenges is that while there are some large brokers, there are a lot of very small brokers as well. So are they expected to do the same type of due diligence that a bank or a big law firm would be able to do? Or can they rely on other parties within the transaction, such as a bank, for instance? If they've done their due diligence, then the broker can sort of take reassurance from that.
Well, I'm not sure it's a good idea to rely on anyone but oneself. Although there are some exceptions in certain types of transactions in certain geographies in the world that provide that if a bank is involved in a transaction, you can, rely on their due diligence, or not to get out of doing KYC. So, for example, in the U.S., if a bank's involved in a real estate transaction, then you might have a lower standard that you'd have to meet. But the fact is that even banks have been dinged for sanctions violations, in the past. So I think that the thing is that, if you're in a small broker, you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money on resources that are out there. I mean, you could go, to the European websites or Her Majesty's Treasury's website, the UN sanctions website, or even OFAC, and type in a name, because there are fields and they're relatively easy to use. So that might be reasonable. You got to talk to your own lawyer, and I'm not here in the capacity of being a lawyer. I'm here as the director of AIC Global. But you'd want to figure out for yourself, like, if you just ask the question, who owns 25% or more of, your company? Does anyone control 25% or more of your company? If it's appropriate, how do they make their money? These are basic questions.
Okay.
And then if you need to run down a paper trail, you do that.
I'm going to jump in and say that Eric's, in a way, simplifying it, if I may, because you're thinking that we always deal directly with the end user. Most of the time you're dealing with another party. And I think the trouble starts when you ask the question of the other broker or whoever represents buyer or seller, and they start dancing around the answer. There's your first sign that somebody doesn't have either control of the transaction, a mandate, or they don't want to disclose that information for whatever reason. If you do learn the names, and that's difficult with aircraft registered outside of the United States. I mean, not saying that it's not also the case here stateside, but definitely outside of the US. But if you get that information, you could start with a Google search and see what pops up. If nothing nefarious or questionable populates in the first few pages, then you're probably on, a safe bet, if you will. And then there are resources starting to develop for people in the trade to turn to at a reasonable cost to at least do some sort of background work. Because the last thing you want to do is lead your client down the path to a transaction, let them spend quite a bit of money drafting documents, maybe getting as far as to pre-buy, only to find out that you can't do business with the person on the other side of the table.
Very good. I think there's a lot more that we could really get into here. We're running out of time. If people do have questions, please let us know, and you're more than welcome to join the discussion. I'm going to just go back to the market a bit, because I think, Janine, I read that you've had Par Avion for 22 years now, or maybe it's longer than that. Is your experience of the demand for aircraft is it the highest demand that you've experienced, or is this comparable to pre-2008? What's your experience here?
I think it's similar to pre-2008. I mean, it's not necessarily unprecedented demand in the history of aircraft sales, but it is relative to at least the last 10 years. I mean, we're kind of coming out of a hibernation from 2008 to 2018. And then suddenly to see the demand shift like it has, not just demand, but the attitude towards it. I think the attitude has developed as very positive, at least stateside. And you find that people who might never previously considered flying private are analyzing their options, they're exploring them. I received a call after hours late last night from a gentleman in Central Texas that basically had been buying hours through a concierge broker. The charter brokers are probably interested in this, someone who has a phone and a website, and sold them a few hours. And the guy was expressing quite a bit of dissatisfaction with the level of service, the quality of airplanes. And he said, we're finally thinking about whole ownership. And I said, well, we're going to travel down quite a path to that, but what's your interim solution? Because you still need uplift. His comment was, we're not going back to the airlines, period, end of story. The schedules are a mess. There's no organization, whether it's in the terminal or in the flight itself. The whole idea of protecting oneself in light of a pandemic has kind of gone out the window. And it's more about how do we get from point A to point B when you ride the airlines, at least stateside. So, I mean, to encapsulate what I'm trying to say is that I think we see very, very positive approach to the use of business aviation.
Fantastic. Thanks for giving us those insights. I think this brings us, we're just slightly over time now. So it was really just a snapshot of our work in these two different areas. I'd like to thank all of their panelists for their contribution. We are continuing this series this Thursday with maintenance, and then next week as well. So it would be great if you could join us again on Thursday. Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Toby. And thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody who participated. I wish you a profitable rest of the day, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.